Madam Mayor and City Council. I spent a long time putting this together, and miraculously, or maybe mysteriously, the computer renumbered all the slides, and so we're going to start with slide 12 instead of slide number 1, but we'll do our best. We will step through the slides. There's not a lot of pretty pictures here, folks. It's bureaucratic procedures that we have to go through. So at the end, City Manager will have comments about the process. There's 2 tracks that we will follow when we go through the slides. The first track will be, but we start off with the common procedures, and then we'll divide off and we'll follow the state motor fuel tax track all the way through to the end. Then we'll back up and we'll pick the local motor fuel tax track. They are 2 distinct tracks. And then towards the end of the discussion, we will have a more detailed discussion of the MBE ordinance and how it applies.
Excuse me, Mr. Morelli, are these documents that I have seen in our meeting of a week or so ago?
They are revised into a format for the PowerPoint.
Thank you.
Generally, they are the same topic.
Thank you.
Yes. First, we'll talk about the state and local motor fuel tax projects. They all start out the same way. We inspect the streets. Generally, that happens in November, December, and January. It depends on the weather. We have to have the pavements clear and free of snow. So it's hard to predict how long that's going to take. We do half of the streets every year, so that once every 2 years we have a completely updated inspection. The numbers that we do there's so much data, we put it into a program that we use called Lucity. It crunches the numbers for us. We have 825 lane miles of street. That'd be very, very difficult to do with paper and pencil and people and all of that. Much more efficient to do the computer system. It generates a list of streets that are in most need of repair. It's a shopping list, if you will. We review the shopping list with our Municipal Services staff, because what we want to do is find out the ones that they believe from their practical standpoint need the most attention. The numbers may crunch and indicate that a particular type of, say, alligator cracking needs attention, but it's actually the ones that have the more potholes that we really want to work on to deal with from Municipal Services. So what we end up doing is prioritizing the shopping list into a much shorter list to better match the funding. We then go into the field and provide a detailed engineering survey, and we design the improvements, and then we make draft bidding documents. Now, here's where it divides. So here we will talk about state motor fuel tax projects only. The first 4 steps are the same. Even though the City Council has approved a budget at the beginning of the year, the state wants you to reappropriate the money, and it's a separate step, and Council votes to appropriate motor fuel tax dollars. You identify the locations, you approve the locations, the lengths, the widths, and you approve an estimate. We then send those documents back down to IDOT for their review and approval. They invariably change something, it comes back to us, we make the corrections, we send it back down, and the documents are ready for bidding. We advertise for bids, and then the bids are opened. And when we open the bids, we check for some basic paperwork. We want to see that the addendums, if there are any, are present. We need to see if the bid bonds are in there, insurance papers, insurance documents. And then we read the total bid price. We do not read the unit prices. In street projects, we do things in bits and pieces. We'll have so many square yards of concrete sidewalk to be replaced, and then the contractor will bid a price to do that, and then the mathematics will go, and there'll be an extension, and all of that will get added up. And so it's pretty important, but it's the unit prices that prevail, but we only read the bid prices. The unit prices remain confidential until such time as the contract is awarded. After we go through and openly read the bid, read it aloud, then we go back to the office and we check the bids. Interestingly, from time to time, there are mathematical errors that take place. The unit prices didn't get extended the right way, so those have to be corrected. And from time to time, the apparent low bidder will change because of mathematical errors. Not very often, very rare, but it does happen. We look to see if there are any omitted documents. We make sure that everything is properly signed. Then we take it to the city council, ask for your approval. Then after that, it is sent once again to IDOT. The thing to remember about motor fuel taxes is that even though they send us a check, well, a money transfer every month, and even though that money resides in our bank, IDOT still shepherds that money as if it were their own. So they're looking over the shoulder the entire time. So IDOT reviews and approves all the documents. The contracts are signed by IDOT. They come back and they are signed by the city. And then lo and behold, we are ready to, well, special note, but then we are ready to go to the pre-construction conference. Now, here I want to make a special note. The city's MVE ordinance does not apply to state motor fuel tax projects. That point was brought out by one of the earlier citizen speakers. IDOT, we have asked IDOT if we could apply the city's MVE ordinance to state projects, to state-funded projects, and the answer is no, we may not. We can ask again, we could check other ways, and I'm sure that we should do that. IDOT is governed by the Code of Federal Regulations in terms of their minority hiring and minority requirements. IDOT's construction contractor workforce goals are set in IDOT in Springfield by the Office of Federal Contract Compliance. The goals for projects in Macon County are 7.2% minority and 6.9% female workers. They did not tell us or did not provide any information about whether there are any minority business enterprise requirements. I do not know anything about that. This information was sent to me by email from the director of office, the director in the Office of Business and Workforce Diversity. We received it on April the 27th this year. State motor fuel tax projects, after we go through the bids, after it's awarded, we hold a pre-construction conference. That's when we hear about the exact work plan that the contractor may propose, and then the schedule, and then our work begins. Takes a while to get to this point. Now, we're going to drop back and we're going to pick up local motor fuel tax projects. And the city's MVE ordinance does apply to all local funded projects. That means not just local motor fuel tax, it means water funded projects, sanitary sewer projects, stormwater fund projects, and general fund projects. We don't spend as much general fund as we used to, but take, for example, building improvements, like perhaps some of the work that's being done at the fire stations. Those are general fund projects, and they are covered by the city's MVE ordinance. The first four steps for local projects are the same as for state motor fuel tax projects. So in the local MFT project, in addition to going through with Municipal Services folks, we take an extra step. We meet with the city manager and we look at the worst condition streets in the city, and we review the map and we look for neighborhood balance so that we don't focus in one particular area. This year, you'll notice projects are in all parts of the city. We look for socioeconomic balance. We don't want to end up fixing only one neighborhood where there might be a predominantly lower socioeconomic or higher socioeconomic. So we try to balance that out, and we try to find some middle of the road folks. And then we look for budget balance. We do our level best to estimate the costs of our projects based on prices that we've received recently for similar type work. As you know, this year, our bid prices came back in surprisingly considerably below what we estimated. But nevertheless, we do make a very strong effort to match the budget to the work, match the work to the budget. So after we take those steps, we complete the bidding documents, we advertise for bids, and before we open the bids, we hold a pre-bid conference. This is new in 2016. We have done it very rarely in the past for unique or extremely complex projects. However, this step in 2016 was added because of the increased emphasis that we are placing on the MBE ordinance. Excuse me a minute. Let me get a sip of water. Thank you. And we will talk more about that pre-construction, or excuse me, pre-bid conference. We'll talk more about that later on. I'm just going to, it'll start on slide, it was going to be slide 20, but now I think it's going to be slide 37. Anyway, we'll talk more about that in a little bit, but I'm going to finish the process and then we'll drop back. So we open the bids and read them aloud. Staff verifies that the bid includes the bid bond and certificates of insurance, any addendum if there are any, and the appropriate MBE forms. We do not review all of the forms in detail, only to see if they are present. We also read the bid aloud. Same rules apply. We don't read the unit prices. We only read the bottom line. After the bid opening, we take the bids back, bid documents back, and we review them, and we look again for mathematic errors. Unit prices prevail. This is written into the standard specifications. It's written into IDOT standard specifications. We look for whether we review the MBE forms for adequacy. Are the goals met? If not, then we look for an evidence of a good faith effort. MBE, if the good faith effort, there's an MBE participation waiver request. If the good faith effort is sufficient, the waiver is granted. If it is not sufficient, a waiver is not granted, and the bid is considered to be non-responsive. Local motor fuel tax projects, the lowest responsive bid is recommended to the City Council for contract award. Once that occurs, there's a pre-construction conference. Again, the contractor outlines their work plan, and then the schedule, and then at last work begins. And we did, in fact, as one of the subcontractors mentioned, we did have a pre-construction conference today with both of the contractors, and work will be commencing shortly. Now, more on the pre-bid conference. At the pre-bid conference, this is usually handled by the city engineer, Matt Newell. He goes through and he steps through Chapter 28, Article 10. He distributes copies of that article to each one of the contractors who are bidding on the project. Those who are not bidding, those who are not present, by the way, let me say, at the beginning of the year, we did not make these mandatory because some of our contractors are from far distant away, and we wanted to encourage as many people to attend the pre-bid conference, but there's more importantly, to receive their bids. Since that time, we've changed their approach. They are now a required attendance. However, it is possible to attend by conference call. So for those who may be some distance away and where this is expensive and to attend this conference, they can still get the same information by conference call. We review the city's policy on the MBE ordinance. In other words, why it is that we undertake this, and this will be part of the discussion that we'll get into in a few minutes. We review the definition of minority, and we discuss what constitutes a good faith effort. Now, this is very important, and I am going to read the language which is contained within the city code. It says, and I went too far, it says, a good faith effort means the contractor took reasonable and necessary steps to achieve the minority participation goals. Good faith means the contractor actively and aggressively sought participation by MBEs. That language is in the city code. That's pretty strong language. Moving ahead. So the question, we talk about policy. What is it that the city is trying to accomplish here? We're trying to ensure non-discrimination in the award and administration of our public works contracts. We're trying to encourage level playing field in which MBEs and minority workers can compete fairly for our work in the city. And we're helping to remove barriers to the participation of MBE and minority workers. We're promoting the use of MBEs and minority workers in city public works projects. We are ensuring that minority participation and goals are tailored to in accordance with the applicable law. We are providing appropriate flexibility to contractors in establishing and providing opportunities for MBEs and minority workers. Now, the goals that are stated in the ordinance are indicated shall make a good faith effort to comply with the goals, and the goals are 10% of the total dollar amount of the contract should be performed by minority business enterprises if, key words here, if subcontracting opportunities are available. Those are very key words. We have several contractors who do all the work themselves. One of our local electrical firms does all the work themselves. We have had other contractors, contractors or contractors who do sewer work, who do all the work themselves. There is no requirement, there is no set aside for subcontracting work. There is no set aside for minority subcontractors. There is a requirement that they hire 18% of the total work hours should be performed by minority workers. That in this previous year was a little difficult to meet, but I think that improvements have been made at the local workforce, and I think that the local unions have improved their ability to provide 18% of the workers' work hours by minority workers. Okay.
Mr. Molly, Mr. McDaniel has a question.
I hate to,
Sure.
That's an essential. Why do we have that in there? Can you explain that to the public?
Why do we have?
If subcontracting opportunities are available. I think that's a key point that we need, better understand here in the council and the public.
Well, if they're available, I guess the way to come back at it is that there's no set aside, there's no requirement that there be a subcontractor. But if you're going to subcontract out any portion of the work, you're obliged to look for, you need to look for people who can do that kind of work. If you're going to subcontract out, say, electrical work, You need to look for minority business enterprises who can perform electrical work. And it needs to be of the type of work that you're actually going to subcontract out. So for example, again, using electricians and plumbers, if you are going to subcontract out on water main projects, plumber, you needed to hire plumbing work, and you were going to subcontract out a portion of that, well, you would not be having a good faith effort if all you did was call electricians. That's not the intent here. You need to look for people who can actually do the work for which you're actually subcontracting out.
Real quickly, can you back up one slide? I want to make sure I read something correctly. So if somebody subcontracts out, if they self-perform all the work except for, say, 3% of the project, how does that work?
Well, they have a particular type of work that they are going to be subcontracting out. I mean, you say 3% of the work. Let's suppose that
Or
we are-
9%? I mean,
Pardon?
or 9%, something
Yeah,
less than 10%.
Let's suppose that we're putting in a water main once again, and they're going to contract out, say, 5% of that. Well, what 5% are you actually going to be subcontracting out? Is it going to be the excavation? Is it going to be the backfill? Is it going to be the pavement repair? Is it going to be installing the pipe itself? So you would look for a particular kind of work. You don't just go and say, well, okay, I got 1,000 feet here. I'm going to subcontract out 15% of that 1,000 feet. No, it's different parts of it.
Yeah, I understand that, but it seems that if I'm going to subcontract out 7% of my work and I secure an MBE for that 7%, I still fail to satisfy the ordinance requirements mathematically.
That's correct. You need to demonstrate that you had a good faith effort to attempt to find 10%. That's what the goal says. So you could make a business decision to subcontract out 7%, but the goal still is you need to subcontract out 10%. If you make a good faith effort to look for subcontractors who can accomplish that much work, but you're unable to find that, you see what I'm saying? Once you make the decision to subcontract out, you open yourself up for the rule, the 10% rule.
I guess that's where the math gets tricky, because if I subcontract 9.99% and I award it to an MBE, I still fail to meet the requirements of the ordinance.
That's pretty close.
It is pretty close.
Yeah.
But
Technically.
the key is the demonstration of good faith, but it
That's
doesn't
correct.
address the math issue.
The ordinance is very clear. And if that is a thing that the council wants to change and they want to put in something different than that, we'll be happy to comply, whatever it is the majority of the council votes on and approves. But that's the way it's written right now today.
Thank you.
Okay, moving forward here, it's not required. You must make a good faith effort. We talked, okay, what is good faith effort? You need to solicit through all reasonable and available means the interest of MBE and minority workers. Now, once again, acquiring or hiring minority workers is less of a problem because there's more of them available here in Decatur. Finding MBEs is more of a difficult job. There are some contractors here in town who are able to perform some variety of different work, concrete work, other kinds of work, plumbing work, electrical work. But it takes more effort to find those. Outreach efforts and recruitment of MBE and minority workers is an effort that contractors should employ, and some do. It might be possible to package the requirements, packaging the work so that it's in bite-sized pieces, if you will, or in the right-sized piece so that smaller contractors can accomplish that work. Typically what we find is minority business enterprises are typically smaller at the present time. One of these days, if we keep at this long enough, they will probably grow and probably become prime contractors. That was my experience in my previous employment, by the way. We did have small contractors start out and then grew and became a prime contractor. So I think we've talked about, that there's some variations. This is all contained in the ordinance. Interest will move ahead. Seeking from the community will move ahead. At the pre-bid conference, contact and outreach efforts should be shared with, is suggested that the bidder should make contact with at least 3 MBE firms for each subcontracting opportunity. Other contact methods are contained on the next page, and we'll talk about those in a minute. But most importantly, advertising alone is not sufficient. It's not sufficient because it does not comply with the language in the ordinance, which requires, and I'll have to go back to it. I should have put a sticky note on this one because it's important. Advertising alone is not sufficient because it is not actively and aggressively seeking participation. Putting an ad in the paper is pretty low-key. You can do it without much effort. So the other ways of contacting minority contractors, Metro Chamber, Metro Decatur, Black Chamber of Commerce, our ePrism software has a number of subcontractors. IDOT itself has an MBE listing. This is important. Virtually all of our prime contractors are pre-qualified with the Illinois Department of Transportation. IDOT has on their website a MBE listing. The Capital Development Board also has MBE listings. So therefore, if we're doing building projects, fire department type projects, the Capital Development Board would be a ready source of contractors, subcontractors. Again, it's a different group of skills than what are typically found on highway projects and road projects and bridge projects. So you would have drywall people, you would have electricals, you would have flooring people who are doing interior work in buildings. So the Capital Development Board would be a good source for that kind of work. And also, you can also contact our neighboring cities. The city of Champaign, Springfield, and Peoria all have the same ordinances, or very nearly the same ordinances that we do. They all use ePrism Soft in exactly the same way. City of Peoria has been very successful in having minority business enterprises. And lastly, it is okay, but not enough, to advertise for a general circulation periodicals. And that is the end of my presentation, and I believe the city manager will have some comments.
I do have a quick question, Mr. Marley.
Yes.
Mr. Wilkins, when he spoke earlier this evening, said under, I don't want to misstate what he said, but under the state contracts or IDOT contracts that women are not considered a minority, or?
IDOT uses something they call, there's WBEs and DBEs. I'm not familiar with all their lingo. And I do not know all of the requirements that they may have with regards to minority or business or women enterprises, but there are different classifications. Ours is straightforward. It's minority.
Because I was under the impression that women and disabled firms also counted as minority under state projects, but I may not be correct.
They very well may on the state project. The state and federal rules are different from our rules. Ours is very specific, very direct, specific. Okay.
Mr. Marley, real quick, because what you handed out at the pre-bid meeting, encouraging them where to go to find the MBEs, and you mentioned IDOT, City of Peoria, Capital Development Board, but then you also say, note that these lists maintained by others, such as IDOT Peoria and the CDB, contain women and disabled-owned businesses, enterprises, which do not count towards the cities. Does that mean that IDOT Peoria, I mean, do they include women?
The list includes a lot of different contractors. It includes some contractors on ePrism Soft who are not minority contractors. Hence, if I could use an example of one of our, of the contractor that we use for sewer lining, SAK is the name of the company. They did the Lakeshore Drive sewer lining project, and they've done some other large lining projects for us. They're out of St. Louis. They operate, they have a large list of their own. They sent out for one of our projects, one of our lining projects, they sent out 62 emails to people who were on their list. Then they followed up with telephone calls to some of those people who they thought would be more interested in the work. And then they ultimately got some proposals back. And they were, particularly, they were looking for television or televising inspections for the insides of the sewers. We happen to have a local contractor who does that. TSI, which we use those services for televising our sanitary sewers. They were lower in bid price. So they were not obliged to use the minority contractor. But it's pretty clear that they made a good faith effort. They contacted a lot of people. And the thing that I believe, and I know that when we advertise for bids, the first thing that happens is our secretary in engineering sends out an email blast with it goes to every single contractor who has ever expressed an interest in bidding for the city of Decatur. And it goes out to, I don't know, 60, 70, a lot. And we get calls, people contact us who want to set up plans. So, but sending out email blasts are, frankly, these days, pressing a button. That's not very hard to do. But it does get the kind of response that you need. It does. It's the first and easiest way to make that initial contact.
A couple things. In earlier discussions, a lot of the contractors that were not following the MBE, they are meeting it now. They are going beyond, so that's good.
Yes, that's correct. We started this last year, and there was more discussion. This was primarily with sewer and water contractors. We did not have local motor fuel tax funding last year. And so we did not have any street work that was covered by MBE. So this year, some of our contractors were not familiar with it because they had never done it before. That again is the reason that we had the pre-bid meeting. And I would observe that the contractors who have been through it once before and those who bid it in other communities where this is more routine business, Chicagoland, for example, St. Louis, where it's more routine business, they know how to do it. They've done it. So yes, there's a learning curve. Yes, absolutely.
One more statement. I am troubled by some of the citizens that came tonight thinking that the council wanted to roll back our MBE. I really am. We never discussed anything like that. Matter of fact, you spoke the last meeting about getting the state motor fuel tax. I have that written down, and I'm sure some others that we wanted to look into that. So again, yes. Well,
I'd like to say this. That
Excuse me, you need to, I'm sorry, you need to come to the podium.
may I come to the podium? The state, for all intents and purposes, is looking out of both sides of their mouth. Okay? Let's keep the policy like it is. MBE. The state has a DBE policy, disadvantaged business enterprise, which encompasses women as a DBE. And once you get into that practice, you get some of these majority companies that have companies under their wives' names, and they're eligible to compete against minority businesses as far as getting these projects. See, now, if you would adapt under the motor fuel tax practice, a DBE policy, then you would be required to have that DBE goal in there in order to use this state motor fuel tax money. I would suggest that the city and the city council will avoid that. Let's stick with the minority, and let's see if we can find some way where we can encompass this state motor fuel tax money into the minority business enterprise participation goal project. I would suggest that, and thank you, sir, for your statements and recognizing what I suggested before. I think we can come to an agreement here. I was very encouraged by that pre-construction conference today. There were some allegiances made. There were some agreements. There were some agreements from people to work on future projects together and some projects in this other areas together. So I think we're establishing something here, and our goal as far as being minority participation contractors, that one day we'd like to be able to bond these projects and work on these city projects as a prime contractor ourselves. And so thank you, and let's keep this minority business enterprise goal. Let's not get into the state thing with disadvantage, and there will be a conflict and we'll have a problem there. Thank you.
Pat?
And one more thing, it was mentioned about local preference for companies. I've never been an advocate at that. You know, I want all our companies to do well in our community, but I look at that as a tariff. The same companies that want to go local preference don't want that in other communities where they have to go out and do business there, because that's a disadvantage to them of getting contracts.
I'll say this, there's a contractor here in this town, and I'd like to commend them, and that is Audubon. On this latest project, they have a 30% minority participation on this project. They went beyond, and I think that is something that we can establish a working relationship with these people, and we'd like to establish it with other contractors. We're not looking for adversaries, we're looking for cooperation. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Curry. Mr. Manager?
Thank you, Mayor. I just had some additional comments, and then we'll wrap this up. If there's any additional comments, questions from council. Thank you, Rick, for the PowerPoint presentation. A couple of things. I'm trying to be consistent with what was shared in the individual meetings, and I think that potentially has value in the public study session as well. We've mentioned the city of Peoria, and I think there's value in sharing or reminding that the city of Peoria was one of the models that council used, and my predecessor, in developing the MBE that was developed just a couple of weeks before I started, March 2015. It also was a point of that Pat West, the executive director of the Metro Black Chamber of Commerce, in a meeting, Mayor, you and I and Rick Marley attended in April of this year, where we were talking about our MBE, where we've been, and where we're going next. And she pointed out that just up the road, they have successes that they pointed to and asked us to take a look at that. So we did. Rick Marley was directed to reach out to the Public Works folks with the City of Peoria to see what they are doing right related to the MBE. In June of this year at the transit building, our transit building, Rick Marley hosted a forum with, I think it's United Minorities Contractors Association, Larry Bullock out of Chicago. He came down and just spoke to us. Several council members were able to attend that. As a result of that meeting, we made the decision internally that late October and November of this year, we're going to have a consortium or a forum where we try to connect all of these entities, individuals related to minority participation. There's going to be a union component, there's going to be a prime contractor component, there's going to be a banking component, hopefully, where you do have some subcontractors that desire to become a prime. explain what the bonding procedures are, the insurance requirements, just a number of things, trying to get everybody that we possibly can in this same room to make this connection so that we can advance minority participation. Also, I will share, in the year and a half that I've been here, it's been very clear that the MBE is very important. It also is very it also has been very clear that the local contractors, the backbone of this community that have done many great things for the community, are very important. Unions are very important, and trying to increase the minority participation within the unions. That's a component as well. None of these compete. The ultimate goal is that all three come together and deliver the best opportunities that we can to the community. One of the things that I guess I was concerned about with the locomotive fuel tax, and I'm going to say concerned, the pre-bid meeting was something that I stressed to city staff, to Rick Marley, to Matt Newell, that this was important. I wanted to communicate as much as we possibly can what our MBE expectations are. And while you do not meet a good faith effort related to just simply advertising or simply using ePrism or simply notifying the Black Chamber in this community, we actually gave the answers to the test. And what my concern was is that I have, by saying that you will if you choose to subcontract, you will reach out, and the lists became available, the IDOT list for minority subcontractors, Capital Development Board, City of Peoria. If you choose to subcontract, you shall be required, or suggested rather, to reach out to 3 minority subcontractors. My concern in saying, and again, this was similar to what Peoria is doing, my concern was I possibly have put a max cap on what the prime contractors might do related to minority participation. Have I stifled additional work in trying to employ the minority community? So that actually was a concern of mine. But I also felt that this was an opportunity to communicate and suggest what we feel a good faith effort is. Also, the other thing to keep in mind, and to Councilman McDaniel's comments, I understand 100% about the local contractors. But one thing, if you are responsive and you have met the good faith efforts, you have met our legal requirement. And if council chooses to select a local contractor in that case, even though they might be a higher bid, that's entirely up to you. But they have to meet the they have to meet the MBE component of some of the projects that we have. I guess in closing, and again, Mayor, Council, you might have additional comments. I would just say that I appreciate the opportunity to discuss what the bid process is, discuss the MBE publicly, and think that the 3 considerations that I've heard in many, many meetings, union participation, supporting our local contractors, increasing minority participation, they all come together at some point. This is but one pathway to that end.
Are there questions for the city manager or comments from anyone on council? Mr.
Yeah,
Faber?
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, I would just like to compliment the city manager with his